So today we're diving into a really tough situation. The death of Rebecca Marks, an American student who is studying in Argentina.
Yeah, it's a case that has so many layers.
And we're going to try and untangle some of those layers,
Yeah.
right? Like, why are the Argentinians seemingly doing nothing about this? And, what's behind all these calls for the U.S. to intervene?
Right, and we're going to be looking at a lot of different sources for this deep dive. We've got news reports from both Argentina and the U.S. We've got social media reactions, political commentary, and some background information on Rebecca herself so we can get a better sense of who she was.
Yeah, and from what we've gathered, she was a really bright young woman, someone who had a passion for economics, and she saw Argentina as this, like, huge learning opportunity.
Yeah, she picked Argentina very specifically because of its kind of unique economic situation.
Right. She wanted to, learn from another culture, broaden her horizons.
Exactly, immerse herself in Argentine society.
And you can just imagine her excitement going there, right?
Absolutely.
And this happens like this horrible tragedy.
Tragedy struck on March 9th, 2025.
Yeah. The reports say she was found dead in Palermo, which is in Buenos Aires.
Multiple stab wounds.
And this is where it gets so frustrating because the details are so sparse. The perpetrators are unknown. The police investigation seems to have just hit a wall.
Right. There's a real sense of mystery here, and some are even going so far as to say that there could be some kind of cover-up.
And what's even more disturbing is the silence from the Argentine public. Like, it's almost as if this whole thing has been ignored.
There's a sense of apathy almost that echoes a broader problem in Argentina, the perception that their justice system is not really effective. Remember the Maria Soledad Morales case in 1990?
Yeah.
It caused a national uproar and kind of exposed these problems with impunity in the justice system.
And it seems like this case is feeding into that same narrative.
Right.
Which makes it all the more tragic. And then, of course, you've got the political dimension.
Of course.
The Milei government had denied any involvement whatsoever, calling Rebecca's death an isolated incident.
But their response has been, I'd say, tepid at best.
Yeah, lukewarm, right.
Some sources even suggest that there's a deliberate effort to not do anything, to not investigate this, because they're afraid of what it might reveal about their own systemic failures.
Yeah, like admitting fault would be worse than actually pursuing justice.
Right. It's like they're sweeping it under the rug and hoping it'll just go away.
And that's where you get these calls for the U.S. to step in. We're seeing American politicians, advocacy groups, and even everyday citizens saying, hey, the U.S. needs to hold Argentina accountable.
It's this idea that the U.S. has an obligation to protect its citizens no matter where they are in the world.
Right.
And that basic human rights are universal.
Yeah.
And that the U.S. has a duty to uphold those rights, even if it means getting involved in another country's affairs.
It's a really tough situation because on the one hand, you have Argentina's sovereignty, their right to handle their own internal issues.
Right.
But then on the other, you have this young American woman brutally murdered and what looks like a complete lack of interest in bringing the people responsible to justice.
It's a delicate balancing act, to say the least, and we also have to consider that there might be political motivations on both sides. The U.S. could be accused of using this tragedy to kind of assert its influence over Argentina,
Right.
while the Argentine government might be intentionally downplaying the situation to avoid scrutiny from the international community. And what gets lost in all this is that you have a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. Rebecca Marks, her death, becomes a symbol of this geopolitical struggle.
And then there's this whole other layer of social media. You've got these hashtags like hashtag America Mustache and hashtag Justice for Rebecca blowing up online with people all over the world expressing their outrage over this.
Social media has this power to shine a light on these issues and to pressure governments to do something.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about the possibility of misinformation, the media's role in all this, and the potential dangers of online mob mentality. It's a double-edged sword.
We have to be so critical of the information that we're taking in, especially online. And we need to try to look at this from multiple perspectives and try to avoid rushing to judgment.
Right.
This case has so many layers. It deserves to be looked at with nuance if we really want to understand what's going on.
And that's what we're trying to do here in this deep dive. We want to untangle this complex situation and give you the information you need to make your own conclusions. So what are your initial reactions to all of this so far? What are your thoughts? It's easy to get swept up in all the emotion of this case, the anger, the desire to see some kind of action. But as we dig a little deeper, it becomes clear that, just an emotional response could actually have some unintended consequences.
That's a really good point, and our
Uh-oh.
sources actually bring up a few of those potential pitfalls.
Hmm.
For example, several political analysts have said that rushing to intervene could actually backfire.
Yeah, it could damage U.S.-Argentina relations. It could fuel resentment within Argentina, and it might even make it harder to actually get justice for Rebecca.
So it's not just about, you know, flexing military muscle or imposing sanctions.
Exactly. It's about using smart power.
So what does that mean in this case?
Well, it's about using all the tools that are available: diplomacy, economic pressure, cultural influence, to try and achieve a specific outcome.
So in this case, that could look like maybe collaborating with international organizations, applying some diplomatic pressure, or
Yeah.
even, offering support to the Argentine authorities to help them carry out a really thorough investigation.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to hold Argentina accountable while still respecting their sovereignty and working towards a solution that benefits both countries.
But what about Rebecca's family? I mean, they're grieving, they're demanding justice, and they're looking to the U.S. government for help. How do you balance those immediate needs with these long-term strategic considerations?
It's a tough question, and there aren't any easy answers, but I think it starts with empathy, acknowledging the pain and the frustration that Rebecca's family is going through.
Right.
And it also means being honest with them about how complex the situation really is and what the limitations are of what the U.S. government can actually do.
And I think it's also important to remember that this case has implications that go far beyond Rebecca and her family. I mean, it raises all these bigger questions about the safety of Americans abroad, America's role in the world, the limits of American power.
Absolutely. It forces us to confront some difficult truths about the world we live in. A world where violence can happen anywhere, where justice is often elusive, and where even the most powerful country on earth can't always guarantee the safety of its citizens.
So where do we go from here? What are the possible paths forward?
Well, one scenario is that the Argentine authorities, facing all this international pressure, finally launch a real investigation. They might uncover new evidence, they might identify the perpetrators, and they might bring them to justice.
That would be the ideal outcome.
Of course, but there's no guarantee of that.
Right. Well,
Another possibility is that the U.S. and Argentina come to some kind of agreement. Maybe a joint investigation. Maybe Argentina commits to reforming its justice system, but that would require a level of trust and cooperation that seems pretty difficult to achieve right now, given the current tensions.
yeah, that's true.
And then there's the possibility that this case just remains unsolved, that justice is never served, and that the diplomatic fallout continues to fester.
And that would be a tragedy on so many levels.
Yeah, a failure not just for Argentina, but for the international community as a whole.
It's a sobering thought, and it
Yeah.
really underscores what's at stake here. It's not just about Rebecca Marks. It's about the principles of justice, accountability, the rule of law.
And it's about the responsibility that countries have to protect their citizens, both at home and abroad, a responsibility that comes with enormous challenges and really difficult choices.
This case really drives home the idea that the world is interconnected. What happens in one part of the world can ripple out and affect us all. It's a reminder that we're all vulnerable, that even in a seemingly peaceful and prosperous country like Argentina, something like this can happen.
And it raises questions about Argentina as a safe destination, especially for students like Rebecca, who are drawn to its unique economic landscape.
That's such a good point, because she was there specifically to study Argentina's economy. So for other students, for anyone thinking of traveling there, this case has to raise some serious concerns.
Right. Is Argentina doing enough to protect those who come to learn and contribute to their society?
And if not, what steps need to be taken to ensure their safety? It's a conversation that Argentina needs to have, both internally and with the international community.
Absolutely.
This really highlights how Rebecca's case is about more than just one tragic death. It's about the responsibility that we all have to protect each other, to stand up against injustice, and to demand better from our leaders.
It's a reminder that justice isn't something we can just take for granted. It has to be actively pursued, demanded, and upheld, even when it's challenging or politically inconvenient.
But it's also about recognizing the limits of what any single government can do, even one as powerful as the U.S.
And that's where this idea of solidarity comes in. It's about citizens demanding action from their governments, yes, but it's also about citizens supporting each other across borders. And this outpouring of support for Rebecca on social media is a really powerful example of that global solidarity in action.
It really is, and it brings us to the heart of what we're talking about here. Why should someone listening to this, maybe thousands of miles away from Argentina, care about this case.
Because this case, even though it happened far away, speaks to these universal values, to our shared humanity. It's a reminder that in our interconnected world, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it shows how important individual action is, raising our voices, demanding accountability, not just from our own leaders, but from leaders around the world.
We've talked about the tragic loss of Rebecca, the inadequate response from the Argentine authorities, and the calls for the U.S. to get involved. But there's this whole other aspect that we need to talk about, too, and that's the human element.
It's really easy to get so caught up in these geopolitical debates that we forget about the individual at the center of it all. Rebecca was a daughter, a friend, a student with, dreams and aspirations. Her life was cut short, and that loss has this ripple effect that goes way beyond politics.
And that's where the power of that social media outcry comes in. It's not just hashtags and trending topics. It's real people from all over the world coming together and demanding justice for Rebecca, making sure her story is heard and that she's not forgotten.
Yeah, it reminds us that even when we're up against these seemingly impossible obstacles like government inaction or international indifference, that individual voices can still make a difference. It's about solidarity, it's about people power, and it's about refusing to accept injustice.
And in the midst of all of this, it's about holding on to hope.
Yeah.
Hope that justice will prevail, that Rebecca's death won't be in vain, and that this tragedy might actually spark some positive change.
And that brings us to the question we want to leave you with today. What can you do? How can you contribute to this conversation, to the pursuit of justice, to creating a world where tragedies like this are less likely to happen?
It could be signing a petition, contacting your elected officials, maybe donating to a human rights organization, or even just raising awareness about Rebecca's case. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a larger movement for change.
I think it's important to remember, too, that solidarity isn't just about these grand gestures. It can be as simple as, educating yourself about Argentina's justice system, reading articles about Rebecca's case, having conversations with your friends and family about this.
Right.
Sharing information, keeping the conversation going. Those are acts of solidarity, too.
So true. It's about keeping Rebecca's memory alive and using this tragedy as a starting point for greater understanding and action.
Rebecca Mark's story is a tragedy, there's no doubt about that. But it's also a call to action, a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and that it's given you a new way of looking at this very complex situation.
Remember, this isn't just some story that happened somewhere else. This resonates with these universal values, with our shared humanity, and with our responsibility to stand up for what's right no matter where injustice occurs.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep demanding better until next time.